Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about why big bucks make hunters second guess themselves. And honestly, this is one of the most overlooked parts of mule deer hunting. Mature bucks don't just survive because they hide well, they survive because they create uncertainty. They make experienced deer hunters doubt good country or abandon solid plans. It makes them move too fast and overreact emotionally. You can spend hours glassing a basin that looks dead, only to suddenly find a giant buck standing exactly where you already looked 10 times. That's what mature mule deer do. They force deer hunters into frustration and impatience. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent mule deer hunter. And after more than 34 years of hunting and guiding, I can tell you this: killing mature mule deer is just as much mental as it is physical. The hunters who consistently find big bucks usually aren't the guys moving the most. They're the ones who stay disciplined long enough for the mountain to finally reveal what everybody else missed. One of the biggest mistakes deer hunters make is assuming mature bucks behave like normal deer, and I don't believe that they do. Young bucks and does will often expose themselves more predictably. They'll feed longer, move earlier, and tolerate more visibility. Mature bucks, they survive because they do the opposite. They minimize their exposure. They use terrain differently, and they move with more purpose. A big buck might live in the exact same basin as smaller deer, but he's going to use completely different layers of that terrain. He's going to bed tighter to escape cover. He's going to use shadows longer in the morning. He's going to stage below ridges instead of skylining himself. He's going to feed in places where he can disappear in a few steps. The problem is most deer hunters expect visual confirmation too quickly. If they don't see a mature buck within the first hour or two, they're going to start doubting the basin. But mature bucks are built to create that uncertainty. They survive by making hunters feel like they're not there. That's why hunting mature mule deer feels mentally exhausting sometimes. You're constantly fighting the urge to abandon good country simply because you haven't been rewarded yet. Now, a basin can look completely empty and still hold a giant buck. That's something mature mule deer hunters eventually learn the hard way. These deer are masters at using terrain to stay hidden in plain sight. A buck doesn't need thick timber to disappear. Sometimes all he needs is a small fold in the hill, maybe a brush pocket, a shadow line, or a cut in the shale. From a distance, those little terrain features look pretty insignificant, but to a mature buck, they're survival tools. This is why patient glassing matters so much. Most deer hunters move too quickly. They glass for 20 minutes, maybe 30, then they relocate. Meanwhile, the mature buck hasn't even stood up to stretch yet. I've seen giant bucks appear hours into a glassing session in country I thought I had already picked apart completely. Nothing changed except the light, the shadow, and my patience. The deer was there the whole time. The longer you stay still, the more the mountain starts revealing detail. Shadows shift, ears flicker, antler tips catch light, a horizontal backline suddenly appears where there wasn't one before. Big bucks reward patience because a lot of deer hunters simply don't have enough of it. Mature bucks are incredibly good at creating false conclusions. Deer hunters start convincing themselves there are no deer in the basin, no mature bucks in the drainage, or no reason to stay. And a lot of times, those conclusions are based on incomplete information, and that's a trap that I want to talk about here. One slow morning can completely change a hunter's mindset. Suddenly, they start scrambling. They move to another ridge or another basin or even another mountain. They abandon the sign, they abandon logic, and they start just hunting emotionally instead of strategically. The reality is mature bucks often move during very small windows. Sometimes it's just a few minutes. Maybe the sun shifts, maybe thermals stabilize, maybe pressure changes movement timing, but those tiny windows are often when the giant bucks expose themselves. A lot of deer hunters leave before those moments happen. A mature buck doesn't survive by feeding in the open for hours. He survives by limiting his exposure while still meeting his needs. That means hunters have to stop expecting constant movement and start understanding controlled movement. The guys who consistently kill big deer aren't always seeing more deer. A lot of times, they're simply staying mentally committed to good country longer than everybody else. And really, we should talk about pressure because it changes mature buck behavior way faster than most hunters realize. And I'm not just talking about direct pressure from getting bumped. Sometimes all it takes is repeated human movement, ATV traffic, hiking silhouettes on ridges, or constant glassing from the same exposed knobs. Mature bucks notice patterns quickly. And one thing I've learned over the years is that big bucks often don't leave an area completely. Instead, they shift into tighter terrain layers nearby. Maybe they move lower into broken timber. Maybe they tuck into avalanche chutes or brush pockets or just dead ground that hunters overlook because it's harder to glass. And that's why hunters often think bucks disappeared overnight. In reality, the buck probably only shifted a few hundred yards, but into terrain that offered him more security.
Hey, if you're serious about becoming a more consistent mule deer hunter, I built a mule deer hunting series of ebooks to walk you through my entire process step by step. This is a 7-volume system designed specifically for Western hunters pursuing mule deer in real mountain and public land environments. In Volume 1, Foundations and Reality, you're going to learn how to understand how mule deer actually live, the myths that mislead most hunters, and the mindset required for consistent success. In Volume 2, Finding Mule Deer and Understanding Pressure, you're going to learn how mule deer move across the landscape and how hunting pressure changes their behavior. In Volume 3, Terrain, Aspect, and Positioning, you're going to learn how to read mule deer country and position yourself correctly using terrain and wind. In Volume 4, Glassing, Visual Discipline, and Buck Identification, you're going to learn how to find mule deer, glass efficiently, and identify mature bucks. In Volume 5, Early Season and High Country Strategy, you're going to learn how to hunt velvet and early season bucks in alpine terrain. In Volume 6, Rut, Transition, and Late Season Movement, we're going to talk about understanding migration, cold weather movement, and how bucks shift through the season. And in Volume 7, Execution and Decision Stacking, we're going to talk about how to close the distance, execute under pressure, and make disciplined decisions during the stalk. If you want to hunt mule deer with structure instead of guesswork, you can buy them individually, or you can bundle all the volumes together and save 50% off the entire mule deer hunting series of ebooks at backboneunlimited.com.
Pressure compresses movement, it shrinks daylight exposure, and it forces mature bucks into survival mode faster than younger deer. This is also why repeated glassing from obvious locations can hurt you. Bucks start recognizing danger tied to more predictable human behavior. The best mature buck hunters I know understand that pressure changes visibility before it changes location, and that's a massive difference in the way you think about it. And it's one of the biggest reasons hunters second guess themselves during mule deer season. Big bucks also force hunters into mental mistakes. That's part of their survival advantage. The longer a hunter goes without seeing deer, the more emotional their decision making usually becomes. Suddenly, guys start changing everything. They switch basins too fast. They abandon good glassing spots. They start hiking further just to feel productive. They confuse movement with progress. I've absolutely done it myself plenty of times over the years. The problem is, fatigue makes this even worse. So when you're tired, cold, frustrated, dehydrated, or just mentally worn down after several days of hard hunting, your confidence starts slipping. And once confidence disappears, your discipline usually disappears with it. That's when hunters start chasing random sign or forcing stalks or constantly changing plans instead of slowing down and just trusting the process. Mature bucks expose impatient deer hunters constantly. The best mule deer hunters I know aren't always the most aggressive guys on the mountain. Usually they're the most disciplined. They stay calm, they stay observant, and they avoid emotional decisions. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do during a tough hunt is simply stay put longer, maybe glass harder, and let the mountain tell you what's actually happening instead of forcing answers that aren't there yet. The hunters who consistently kill mature bucks, they think differently than everybody else. They don't rely on emotion. They rely on patterns, terrain, pressure, and disciplined observation. They understand that mature bucks almost always prioritize security first. Everything else comes after that. Feeding, movement, visibility, travel routes, All of it revolves around survival. That's the priority. Because of that, experienced deer hunters stop asking, where would I see a deer? And they start asking, where would a mature buck feel safe enough to survive daylight? That mindset changes everything in deer hunting. Instead of bouncing randomly through country, they start evaluating terrain layers together, like bedding cover, escape routes, thermals, shade, visual protection, human access, pressure direction, feeding proximity, and most importantly, they stay mentally stable when things get slow. That's a huge separator in success. Anybody can stay confident when they're seeing deer constantly, right? But mature buck hunting usually involves long stretches of uncertainty. The hunters who succeed are the ones who can remain disciplined even when there's no immediate reward. A lot of mature bucks are killed by hunters who simply trusted their system long enough to let the buck finally make a mistake. Big bucks, they make hunters second guess themselves because that uncertainty is part of how they survive. If they can outweight you, they're going to win. Mature mule deer are built around minimizing their exposure, controlling their movement, and using terrain in ways that a lot of hunters never fully understand. They force people into impatience, they force emotional decisions, and they make good hunters abandon good country every single season. That's why mature mule deer hunting feels so mentally difficult sometimes. It's not just the hiking, the elevation, the weather, or the glassing, it's the constant battle against doubt. But the deer hunters who consistently kill mature bucks usually have one thing in common: they stay mentally steady longer than everybody else. And that's probably true across all hunting. The successful guys are able to do that. They trust the terrain, they trust patterns, they trust patience, they understand behavior, and they don't panic when things get slow. Sometimes the giant buck isn't gone. Sometimes he's been there the entire time, watching hunters walk away because they convinced themselves he couldn't possibly still be there. Now, if you want to go deeper into mule deer movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the mule deer hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how mule deer actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of mule deer resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. I hope to see you in the comments. I appreciate all of you. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.